Hi.
Hi there. Welcome back to English for Specific Purposes at the B2 Plus level. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Daryl.
And I'm Miss Tatia. მოგესალმებით. კეთილი იყოს თქვენი დაბრუნება ჩვენს ტელესკოლაში. მე თათია ვარ, ეს კი დერილია. დღევანდელი ჩვენი გაკვეთილის თემა კი ჯანსაღი ცხოვრების წესია. But before we go to the lesson, I think that we have to look at our agenda, Mr. Derek. What's on our agenda today?
Excellent point. Let's start with an introduction, as we normally do, and that will lead us straight to the vocabulary list. We've got some interesting idioms today. From there, you can use that to help us with the reading text. And that will bring up some grammar questions, which we will explain in detail a little bit later, followed by a summary of everything together.
გაკვეთილს როგორც ყოველთვის მცირე შესწავლით დავიწყოთ, შემდეგ შევისწავლით საინტერესო იდიომებს, რომელიც ჯანსაღი ცხოვრების წესთან იქნება დაკავშირებული. ამის შემდეგ წავიკითხოთ საინტერესო ტექსტს და მივიღებთ რჩევებს, შემდეგ განვიხილავთ გრამატიკას, საბოლოოდ შევაჯამებთ გაკვეთილს და შემდეგ გადავალთ საშინაო დავალებას. Okay. Mr. Daryl, as today's lesson is about healthy lifestyle, I would like you to give me some tips on how to live a healthy life.
Well, I'm probably not the expert, but I can suggest a few things. Well, eat well, first off. I think that would be most important. What do you mean by eating well? Well, stay away from junk food, stay away from fast food, stay away from the beers, like heavy beer, drinking and so on.
So drinking is bad?
Yeah, possibly.
Okay. So I think another tip would be to do some workouts.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Doing some exercise, of course, is probably the most important thing you could do.
Yes, and anything else?
I'd say if you want to stay healthy, stay positive, keep a positive outlook.
Oh, very good tip.
And that will bring out the way you relate to people and the way you talk to your friends and so on. It will bring out something healthier in you.
I think that we should focus on positive things in life rather than negative ones.
Definitely.
Okay, so good tips, but I don't think that it's very easy to follow, but I will try and tell you the results at the end.
Yeah, as long as you try.
Okay. So, Mr. Jared, as you know, we have to look at our first set of vocabulary, and I think that today we are going to introduce very interesting idioms that people can use in their everyday life, right?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to bringing them out for you guys.
Okay. So the first one we have is to feel a rundown. It's an idiom, and in Georgian it means დაღლილი დაქანცული ყოფნა. Okay, so how would you define that idiom, Mr. Daryl?
Well, when you feel run down, you feel like you've done a lot of work. You feel like you're running out of energy. What they mean is you're run down of energy. It's gone away from you.
Okay. So to feel run down, it's an idiom, and in Georgian it means დაღლილი დაქანცული ყოფნა. And we have a very good example here. You probably feel run down. You haven't got a full night's sleep in weeks. So when you don't have full night's sleep for weeks, of course you feel run down.
You feel like you've lost your energy.
Yes. Okay, what is the next idiom, Mr. Daryl?
Also a good one, to be up and about. Up and about.
So to be up and about is an idiom, and in Georgian it means გამოჯანმრთელება. To be up and about. So can you give us more details about this idiom, Mr. Daryl?
So if you've been maybe sick or if you've been under the weather previously, when you're back to yourself, your normal self again.
When you recover.
When you recover, you can just say, well, I'm back up and about.
Oh, great. So to be up and about, it's an idiom. In Georgian, it is translated as გამოჯანმრთელება. And here we have an example. The surgery went very well, and the doctor is optimistic that she'll be up and about soon. It means that the doctor is optimistic, and she thinks that she will be back to normal life very soon.
Good news.
Okay, good news. Now, what about the next?
Yeah, another idiom, to be as fit as a fiddle. To be as fit as a fiddle.
Oh, very interesting. To be as fit as a fiddle is again an idiom, and in Georgian it means ჯანმრთელად ყოფნა, ენერგიით სავსე ყოფნა. Okay, how would you define that idiom in English, Mr. Daryl?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny one, I suppose. A fiddle, as you know, is a violin, like a more kind of countryside violin, not a concert hall violin. Yeah. And to be as fit as a fiddle, I'm not sure where it came from, but it does mean that you are
in perfect condition.
In perfect condition, yeah.
So to be fit as a fiddle is an idiom, and in Georgian it means ჯანმრთელად ყოფნა, კარგ ფორმაში ყოფნა. And we have an example here. I did have surgery a few months ago, but I'm as fit as a fiddle now. Again, good news, right?
Again, good news, yeah.
Our next idiom is to be full of beans. It's such a strange thing. How can you be full of beans?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the funny thing about these idioms.
Okay, so to be full of beans is again an idiom, and in Georgian we translate it as იყო ენერგიით სავსე, მოზღვავებული ენერგია გქონდეს. How would you translate that in your language, Mr. Daryl?
Yeah, well, maybe not translate, but how would I explain it? It'd be like you just have so much energy that you. I think what they were referring to is like there was a thing called Mexican jumping beans, and so these beans would just jump around and move around on their own. So when you're full of beans, you've got all that energy.
Yes, very interesting. So to be full of beans, it's an idiom, and in Georgian it's translated as იყო ენერგიით სავსე, სიცოცხლით სავსე. And here we have a good example. Whenever my daughter is full of beans like this, I have her go run around in our backyard for a few hours.
And get that excess energy out of her.
Yes. Okay, and the next idiom is?
To be under the weather. To be under the weather.
If you're under the weather, you might not feel quite good.
Yes.
Right? So to be under the weather is an idiom, and in Georgian it's translated as შეეძლებათ ყოფნა. And how did you define that idiom in English, Mr. Derek?
Well, if you've got a cold or if you feel kind of sick, you often say, well, I feel under the weather at the moment. I'm feeling under the weather.
To be under the weather is an idiom, and in Georgian we translate it as შეეძლებათ ყოფნა. And here is a very good example. I was under the weather last week, but I'm feeling much better now. Again, good news. Okay, and I think that we have finished with the introduction of the idioms, and it's time to check.
Yeah, and you love this part, so I'll let you go first.
Yes, of course, I'm waiting for my turn.
Here's your sentence, and you have to pick the right answer. I think Pamela needs a break. She's been feeling completely something after that stressful business trip.
So if she has had a business trip, and it means that she's very tired and exhausted, and the synonym of tired and exhausted was run down. So I think it would sound like this. So I think Pamela needs a break. She's been feeling completely run down after that stressful business trip. Okay, and I think that it's your turn, Mr. Gerald. I will read a sentence with a gap, and you have to choose the right idiom.
I'll try.
After the accident, James was kept in hospital for more than 2 weeks, but now he is, then there is a gap again.
Well, I remember from our discussion earlier that it's got to be up and about.
And you are right, Mr. Daryl. And how does the sentence sound?
After the accident, James was kept in hospital for more than 2 weeks, but now he's up and about again.
Okay, you're right, Mr. Daryl, and I think that it's my turn now.
Here's your sentence, Miss Tatia. Hi, Allison. I'm just calling to tell you that I won't be coming into the office today. I'm feeling a bit...
If you don't feel good and if you cannot go to work, it means that you are under the weather. Okay, and the sentence sounds this way. Hi, Allison. I'm calling to tell you I won't be coming into the office today. I'm feeling a bit under the weather.
Oh, excellent.
Okay. Now it's your turn, Mr. Gerald. I will read the sentence. You will choose the right word out of 2 options. I would love to know David's secret. He's always, then there is a gap, in any situation.
Okay, so logically, it's got to be, he's full of energy.
Yes.
And in that case, he's full of beans.
Which is a secret for everyone. And you are right. And how does the sentence sound, Mr.
I would
Gerald?
love to know David's secret. He's always full of beans in any situation.
Okay, great. You are right. And the last one is for me, which is the easiest one to do. Can you read it for me, Mr.
I
Gerald?
definitely would love to. Graham runs almost every day. He's, what is it?
He's as fit as a fiddle, I think.
If you run every single day, probably.
Okay. Yeah. Just, if you do work out, if you go to the gym, if you eat healthy food, you generally are as fit as a fiddle.
Yes, excellent.
Okay. And I think that we have finished with the vocabulary part and it's time to move on to reading.
Yeah, the reading section. Very interesting one, by the way.
Yes, but before we read the text, we need to get to know some new words, Mr. Darrow.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, let's look at our second set of vocabulary, and the first word on our list is soreness. Soreness is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as tkivili, anteba. How would you define that word, Mr. Darrow?
Well, if you've ever worked out, you've done a lot of heavy lifting or something, your arms might feel a little pain. That's what we call soreness.
Ah, that's right. Soreness, it's a noun, and in Georgian it means tkivili, anteba. And here we have an example. She was complaining of terrible stiffness and soreness in her neck and shoulders.
Oh, that's
Maybe
terrible.
after the access, doing some
After a car
exercise.
accident. Soreness in the neck is terrible. I know.
You've had it, you have experienced it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Now, what is the next word, Mr. Darrow?
Joints. Simple enough, joints.
Joints is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as sakhsari. How would you define that word, Mr. Darrow?
Your joints are the parts of the body that connect different sections of it together. Like for example, your elbow, your ankles, your knees, all those parts that connect longer parts.
Okay, very interesting. So joint, it's a noun, and in Georgian it means sakhsari. As you become older, your joints get stiffer. This is a reality.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Okay, and our next word is midriff. Midriff is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as diaphragma. How would you define that word, Mr. Darrow?
Your midriff is a simple part, the body part. It's the body part just below the chest and above the waist.
Oh, okay, okay. So midriff is a noun, and in Georgian it means diaphragma. And here we have an example. She wore a short t-shirt that revealed her midriff. It means that it was this part of her body was seen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and our next word is?
Sit-up. It's a type of exercise, a sit-up.
Okay. Sit-up is a noun, and in Georgian we call it azidva. Can you define this word for us?
Yeah, I think most people are quite familiar with this, even if you didn't know the name. Sit-up is when you lie down on the ground and you raise yourself, your upper part, not the legs stay on the ground, and you raise yourself up to a sitting position.
Ah, okay. Sit-up, it's a noun, and in Georgian it means azidva. And here we have an example. She does sit-ups and leg lifts every morning. I think it's a good thing, right, to do.
That's very healthy of her.
Okay. And our next word is belly fat. Belly fat is a noun, and in Georgian we translate it like that. Mutslis tschimi. Belly fat. Mr. Darrow, can you define that word for us?
Well, it's probably something no one ever wants. It's the fat sections that accumulate, that add up around your stomach area.
Okay. So belly fat, it's a noun, and in Georgian we call it mutslis tschimi. And here we have an example. Over time, high cortisol levels cause belly fat to accumulate.
Oh, I didn't know it was cortisol's fault.
Yeah, by the way, I also didn't know anything about it. Okay, and I think that we have come to the text, but before we read the text, we want to discuss some statements, some ideas that are perceived to be true, and let's see whether we agree with the statements or no. So the first statement is the following: soreness is a sign of good workout. Do you agree with the statement, Mr.
I think that makes sense.
Do you think that is true?
Logically it makes sense. When you do a workout, you should have soreness in the arms, or else you didn't do anything.
Okay, let's see. I think that we have the answer to this in the text. Okay. So the second statement is the following: scales are pointless. Oh, I don't agree. Definitely not. I think that they are very useful, especially when you want to lose your weight. You need to have scales, and you have to weigh yourself every day in the morning and in the evening. What do you think? Are they useless?
I believe you. I don't really use scales, but I believe you.
Okay, well. And the next statement is exercise is bad for your knees. Do you think it's right?
I think so. I've heard lots of friends say that when they did a workout in an extreme way or in a bad way, their knees start to hurt after that.
Okay, maybe it's true. We don't know. So you can target fat and reduce it. What do you think about it? Can you target fats and reduce it?
I'm sure you could do it in theory.
Okay. Less rest means you are working harder.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Okay. And the last one, there is one best way to train. Is there only one best way to train?
There probably is. I mean, there are many different ways to do something. There's probably a best way.
Okay. Soreness is good and scales are pointless. The 6 biggest myths in fitness. New exercises are invented every week, so it's easy to think that fitness is confusing, but it isn't. The basics stay the same and the science is pretty well agreed. These are the 6 biggest myths in fitness, so you should keep them in mind as you go about your next workout. The first one, soreness is a sign of good workout. Muscle soreness does not mean progress. It's probably caused by small tears in muscles and happens when you do movements you are not used to, or when you deliberately slow down the move you are doing, or just do too many repetitions. You can avoid soreness almost entirely by reducing the number of repetitions. There is such a thing as pain-free progress.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Okay, so it seems that we were wrong.
We were wrong. Now, the second point, scales are pointless. This is what you were talking about. Modern fitness gurus have popularized this myth. They argue that weight isn't a true measure of progress because fluctuations in the amount of water in the body lead to day-to-day changes in your weight, and putting on muscle can make you heavier. But this doesn't mean you should throw away your scales. You have to understand that short-term fluctuations don't represent changes in body fat, says Emma Story-Gordon of ESG Fitness. But over time, changes in scale weight can predict body fat. Even if you are also building muscle, you lose fat much more quickly than you build muscle. So there's our answer to that. What about the third point, the third myth? Exercise is bad for your knees. Actually, it's more like the opposite. Exercise done correctly will strengthen the muscles around your knee joints, protecting you against injury. As for running, a 20-year study by Stanford University found that regular runners, many of whom were in their 70s, suffered less from arthritis than non-runners as they got older.
Okay, such surprising things to hear. Okay, now let's move on. And the fourth statement, you can target fat and reduce it. Before the days of the internet, a myth persisted that you could target the fat around your midriff by doing hundreds of sit-ups. The internet has destroyed that myth but has replaced it with the idea that it's possible to focus on problem areas by changing your hormones. That since, for example, the stress hormone cortisol causes belly fat to increase, a bit more sleep should help. And while this is sort of true, interfering with your hormones is not really a good idea. The truth is, we all have areas of fat that seem to take the longest to get lean, says Story-Gordon. Don't give up though. Those areas will get leaner along with other areas. Patience is the key.
How amazing that all these things I believed are not true.
Yes.
The next point, number 5, less rest means you are working harder. For most people, especially beginners, periods of recovery between sets or intervals allow for lower risk of injury and better results, says performance and well-being coach George Anderson. Or, in other words, if you push yourself for a whole hour, you'll be forced to lift lower weights, go slower, and generally put in less work than you might with some strategic recovery. Point number 6. There is one best way to learn. Is running better than lifting? Whatever training style you experiment with, you'll find someone who argues that everything else is useless and stupid, says Dr. Michael Bana. The reality is any physical activity has health benefits. The right type is the one that doesn't injure you or make you want to stop.
Oh, very interesting things. We've heard lots of interesting things from the text, I think, and it's time to check how well we remember the tips we've read. Let's read the statements and decide if the statements are true or false. So the first statement is the following. If your muscles are sore, you are making good progress. Is it true or false, Mr. Dara, according to the text now?
According to the text, it's false.
Yes, you are right, because we read muscle soreness does not mean progress. Okay, so I will try the next one, Mr. Darrell.
Here you go. Different amounts of water in the body mean that your weight can change from day to day. Is this true or false?
I think it was true, according to the text.
And you're right.
Because I remember we read, they argue that weight isn't a true measure of progress because fluctuations in the amount of water in the body lead to day-to changes in your weight. And putting on muscle can make you even heavier. Okay, and the next statement is for you, I think, right? So the regular runners suffer more from arthritis than non-runners. Do you remember? You read that part.
I did, and the answer, as I remember, is false.
And you're right, Mr. Darrell, because we read, as for running, a 20-year study by Stanford University found that regular runners suffered less from arthritis than non-runners as they got older.
One more for you.
Yes, I'm ready.
If you want to lose weight, it's a good idea to change your hormones.
Let me think. I think it's false. It's false because I remember that we read stress hormone cortisol causes belly fat to increase. A bit more sleep should help. And while this is sort of true, interfering with your hormones is not really a good idea.
Ah, very good.
Okay, and I think that we have finished with it, and it's time to move on to grammar. What's the topic of grammar today, Mr.
I think a pretty exciting and a useful one. Formal and informal English, knowing when to use them.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the difference between formal and informal English. And so what are the features of informal English? The features of informal English are, first of all, common words and phrasal verbs. So use a lot of common words and phrasal verbs. Second, use abbreviations, contractions, and acronyms. And simple and short sentences.
Now, what are the features of formal English? Here are they. Formal vocabulary and equivalents to phrasal verbs, fewer abbreviations, contractions, and acronyms, and more complex sentences through use of linkers, passive forms, and relative clauses.
Okay, so if I use passive structures, if I use a lot of linkers, if I use some complex sentences and words,
you're being more formal.
I would sound more formal. Okay, very good tips. So again, let's show the difference, or let's kind of compare and contrast. So in formal style, we understate, like we use understatement. For example, I was rather disappointed, whilst in informal style, we are more direct and we say I was furious. Also, we use a lot of passive structures, as we said. The room had been given. In informal structures, we use active, and we would say they'd given our room. And in formal writing, we use no contractions, so we would say I will, whilst in informal speech or writing, we use contractions and we would say I'd, we'd, will, etc.
That's very helpful, Ms. Tatya. Now, continuing along that line, in formal language, we would use non-idiomatic language, as we mentioned before, for example, in short. But in informal language, we would use idiomatic language. For example, the long and the short of it. It's a more complicated way of saying the same thing. Then we have full sentences in the formal way of speaking. For example, had neither a television nor telephone. But in an informal way, you'd leave things out. You might say, no telly, no phone, and so on. Now, in the formal way of speaking, you'd use inversions. Should I, receive, no, and whatever you want to say. But in the informal way, you'd have no inversion. If I don't get this thing, I'm going to be very mad.
it would be very interesting for everyone to know, I mean, what kind of language and what kind of structures to use in different situations,
Yeah.
okay, formal or informal.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that it's time to check how well we can differentiate between formal and informal style. We will have sentences and we have to decide whether they are informal or in informal style, right?
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, the first sentence we have is, because of falling profits, the company may have to lay people off. What do you think? Is it formal or informal, Mr. Gerald?
Yeah, to my ear, that sounds a little informal.
And you are right, because as you can see, we have here phrasal verb, and we generally don't use phrasal verbs. We avoid using phrasal verbs in formal writing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and the next statement is for me, Mr. Gerald, and I'm waiting for my turn.
The company has reported a sharp decrease in its profits. Consequently, a number of employees may lose their jobs.
Very interesting. I definitely think that this statement is formal,
Yeah.
because I can see here linker consequently, and the sentence is quite complex, so I think that just this is a formal way of saying something, right?
Well done.
Okay. It's your turn now, Mr. Gerald. I will read the sentence for you. Don't delay. Thousands of competition prizes are up for grabs.
Excellent. So there's some missing words. There's a bit of a loose structure here. I think it's definitely informal.
Oh, and you're right, Mr. Gerald. Okay, here we have common words like for grabs and phrasal verb, and I think that's why it was informal. Okay, and the next statement is for me, Mr. Gerald.
Thousands of prizes are available to anyone who enters the competition before the closing date.
And I think that this is formal for sure, right? So, for example, are available is more formal word.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sure it's formal. And
Yes,
I'm right.
and it is.
Okay. And one sentence for you. We'll tell you how you got on in the test in a couple of weeks.
Okay, well, tell you how you got on. That's a very informal way of speaking. So this
And by the way, there is also contracted form like will.
Exactly, we will. Instead of that, we have will. It's got to be informal.
And you're right, Mr. Gerald. And I think that we have finished the lesson, and it's time to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, as you remember, we looked at some vocabulary in the beginning.
Very interesting idioms.
Idioms, very interesting idioms, all very positive ones as well.
Yes.
And then we went to the reading, which is about healthy lifestyle myths that we...
And we have very good tips, which we are going to follow.
hopefully. And the grammar section, formal and informal English.
Very interesting. And Mr. Gerald, I think it's time for homework. What are we going to have for homework today?
Well, we would like you to write a paragraph about the most effective exercise to keep fit and healthy.
Oh, maybe we'll get some very good tips from people.
Yeah, something that we haven't thought of ourselves.
Yes. And Mr. Gerald, where can the homework be uploaded?
It can be uploaded to the address you see on the screen right now.
Okay, and I think it's time to finish the lesson and wait for the next lesson, which I think will be very, very interesting, because we are going to have some festive spirits during the lesson, and we're going to talk about Christmas, which is coming, and we all feel excited and happy about it.
This is Christmas week after all, and we I think you can already feel that in the air.
Yes, of course. Christmas is in the air.
That might be why these trees appeared.
Yes, it's beautiful. Okay, so let's say goodbye and wait for the next lesson, Mr.
All
Gerald.
right, I'm looking forward to it.
So stay with us and keep on learning.
Goodbye.
Bye.